All right, good afternoon, everyone. This is Liam Sullivan, NASWA Policy Analyst, and we are here today for Discovering Your Purpose After Transitioning, Tools for Finding the Right Career Match. So before I turn it over to our esteemed panelists, I just wanted to give a quick overview of some things to keep in mind when you're on a Zoom meeting with the volume of participants like we have today. So we will ask that you mute your microphone or your phone. So if you're on via the web, you can click the mic icon next to your name, or you can use the mute button on your phone. To unmute on your phone, you can press *6, and to unmute on the computer, you can select the mic icon again. Use chat to ask questions. Please select everyone when sending a message, and after our panelists speak, there will be time for questions. If your name doesn't appear as your full name, you can go ahead and rename yourself by hovering over your name, clicking More, and then clicking Rename. This meeting is being recorded and will be shared on the NASWA website. Lastly, we'll ask that you do not start video unless you are a presenter or panelist to preserve the bandwidth for our session today. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to our panelists. Thank you.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our session on Discovering Your Purpose, Tools for Finding the Right Career Match Post-Discharge. We're very happy to be able to share our information, strategies, and resources with you today. Our presentation today is under the auspices of the LEAD Center, which is the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, WIOA Policy Development Center of the Office of Disability Employment Policy. The LEAD WIOA Policy Development Center is led by Social Policy Research Associates and National Disability Institute with funding from the Office of Disability Employment Policy at the U.S. Department of Labor. I'm Rebecca Salon with the LEAD Center at National Disability Institute, and I'll ask my co-presenters to introduce themselves. Nancy, would you start?
Sure. Hi, everyone. This is Nancy Boutot with National Disability Institute.
Thank you. And Rose?
Hi, this is Rose Warner, and I'm with the Office of Disability Employment Policy.
Great. Thank you both. So today we're going to be talking about discovery and customized employment so that you'll learn rationales for using discovery, which is an approach that we'll be talking about in determining next career steps. We're going to explore guided group discovery and self-guided discovery strategies that can benefit veterans during their job search. We'll identify ways to guide veterans in determining how their military training, discipline, and mission focus can benefit an employer, and will provide you with access to resources to support veterans transitioning into civilian employment. We'd like to turn it over now to Rose to talk some about ODEP's work and ODEP's partnerships and activities that are related to veterans. Rose?
Great. Thank you, Rebecca. Yeah, hi, everyone. I just wanted to introduce you a little bit to some of the projects that we are working on at the WIOA Policy Development Center, and specifically the ones that have to do with veterans. So the biggest project I'd say that we're embarking on this year is helping more veterans go into an apprenticeship path in order to obtain competitive integrated employment. And we are doing this by working with our partners over at VOCATIONAL and VRE. So we have developed a 3-part training that we are going to be having for folks in the JVSG program as well as VRE. So the first part is really explaining to those service providers, like why, excuse me, apprenticeship is a very innovative path that could be really great for veterans to go into. In 2019, only 222 out of 85,000 veterans served by VRE went into the registered apprenticeship path. And so there's a lot of room to grow in that area. So the second part of the training is really about, best practices for going about connecting the veterans with the registered apprenticeship program. So maybe best ways to find out about how to know where apprenticeships might be in your local area, or best ways to talking to those apprenticeship programs to get veterans enrolled. The third part of the training is really about integrating apprenticeships into the policies and practices that already exist within the VRNE program and the JVSG program. So we have picked 6 pilot sites to be the leaders in these apprenticeship pilots. We're going to be looking at the Los Angeles area in California, the Portland area in Oregon, North and South Dakota, along with Indianapolis in Indiana and Philadelphia in Pennsylvania. So it's just been really wonderful to work with our VETS partners and our VRNE partners on this program. Okay, to go to the next slide, we not only are doing this apprenticeship project, but we also have done a few webinars for the Homeless Veterans Reintegration Program on discovery and customized employment. So kind of similar to what you're going to learn today. And we've helped update the National Veterans Training Institute curriculum to incorporate some customized employment and discovery practices in there as well. Finally, and I think this is a really good segue in today's webinar, we have released a customized employment works for veterans brief. And within that brief, you will see 5 success stories of how customized employment and discovery really helped veterans obtain the competitive integrated jobs they have today. So I think it's the second to last slide. There's a link that you can access to see that brief, and I hope you check it out. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Nancy and Rebecca to give you in-depth information about customized employment and discovery.
Thank you so much, Rose. That was great. So the approach that we'll be discussing today, or the approaches that we'll be discussing today, are all part of customized employment. And customized employment has been defined in law for almost 20 years. And as you can see, there are commonalities in all the definitions. It's all individualized. It focuses on matching what someone has to offer with the needs of an employer so that it benefits both. It highlights the strengths, needs, and interests of a job seeker. And when it talks in some of the definitions about conditions of employment, which we'll discuss in much more detail later, it's important to think about what are those things that will help someone be successful, or some things that might stand in the way of them being successful. So it may be important that someone not be working someplace where there are sudden loud noises, or that they be able to move around periodically during the course of the day, or that they not start their day until 10 o'clock because they have a morning routine that they require. So all of these acknowledge that the person can get their hours in and can get the job done, but may need some customization along the way. Customized employment strategies are helpful in many aspects of life, whether a person has a disability or not. Many people use career assessments and other methods to identify their career interests and talents, and we all use our personal and professional connections to find jobs. When needed, we request flexible work schedules or modifications to accommodate further education or family commitments or other commitments. And taking that kind of traditional route comes more easily to people who don't face challenges or barriers to employment, so that someone who may be experiencing PTSD or physical disabilities, cognitive processing issues, severe and persistent mental health issues, and so on, might need some additional support. For example, someone who experiences anxiety might not be able to respond easily or fully to questions during a traditional interview. They may also have difficulty expressing their interests and explaining their talents or asking for accommodations. So customized employment strategies open doors for people who have not been successful in achieving employment goals due to the complexity of their disability or other situations that they may be experiencing. So CE promotes the identification of interests, talents, and conditions for employment, supports people with barriers to employment to attain their employment goals when traditional strategies have not been successful, and assists in implementation of ongoing supports that promote employment retention. There are several approaches to customized employment, but they all have these common components. And we'll talk more about each of these, but we wanted to give you an overview. So all forms of customized employment include some form of discovery in which you gather information that describes who the person is. It requires that you get to know the person, what interests them, what are their skills, what contributions they bring, when are they at their best, what do they never tire of doing, who they know, and then you translate that information into a written document, often called a profile, that translates their life activities into potential career possibilities. This profile includes their interests, potential vocational themes, which we'll discuss, skills, and ideal conditions of employment. There's then typically a customized employment planning meeting in which people can develop a plan to secure employment with specific ideas of businesses to approach and next steps. And this process uses networking and informational interviews with employers to gather information about the employer community's needs and the community's needs in general. There's an extraordinary statistic that 70 to 80% of the jobs that people get are never posted. So using informational interviews, using networks are critically important for people to be able to see where those opportunities might be that really are a good match for them and benefit an employer at the same time. So the best way to learn about those possible opportunities is to get out and talk to people who know about the opportunities that might be related to someone's interests or someone's vocational themes. And finally, when a match exists, we propose or negotiate the employment opportunity. We ask the employer to consider hiring this person, or the person makes the ask themselves, to meet a business need, possibly in a job that has been customized. So in summary, discovery is the first step in customized employment. It seeks to find out who a person is right now, what their interests and preferences are, their skills and contributions, their conditions of employment. And all of those are used to match the job seeker's needs with an employer's needs. The discovery is based on a set of values. So we believe that each stage of the process supports the premise that there are unlimited ways to make a living in the world, and that there's a place for everyone to make a contribution and earn a living. So this, again, allows you to be much more creative and not be locked into job descriptions and current openings. We believe that all people should be viewed as employable, and that they can make a contribution to the economic well-being of a business, that guidance from a discovery facilitator doesn't mean control, and that the individual must be the key decision maker and agree to take action on their plan so that they have ownership for what's happening. There also is unconditional acceptance of each person as they are. It's understood that each person is an expert on him or herself, and it always focuses on strengths, not on perceived weaknesses or limitations or deficits. We also, in the many years that we've been doing this using different formats, believe strongly that no two paths to discovery will be the same, that each person brings a very different path to get to discovery. So Lead Center and its partners have been using discovery in a variety of ways and in a variety of settings over the last 7 years or so. And discovery really can be used in any program. It's very useful as an initial assessment of skills, conditions of employment, and contributions. It identified support needs and partners to bring in from many programs in which you might interact, and we've listed some that might be particularly relevant for people who are working with veterans, American Job Centers, Social Security, Outreach, Access, and Recovery staff, DVOPs and Leavers, the Homeless Veterans Reintegration Program. So there are many partners that can be brought into this. And it also can be added to intake as people are starting in a program. Guided group discovery has been and can become part of a job club if that's something that your program or partners do. And it creates a blueprint for employment that guides the plan and job development. And my colleague Nancy will be sharing a blueprint for employment with you shortly. It promotes the braiding of and leveraging of resources across systems. So it really encourages you to partner. If people have complex needs, you might need more than one system to address what barriers they may bring to the situation. And because of that partnering, it leads to successful outcomes for all, that the person benefits and the partners that are collaborating benefit from someone being successful in that process. Our approach to guided group discovery was developed by Lead Center in collaboration with 3 organizations, Mark Golden Associates, Griffin Hammis Associates, and Transcend, all of whom are known for their work in discovery and customized employment. It offers the opportunity for people to reflect on their experiences and learn and receive feedback from others. And there's some wonderful things that happen through that group process. And it's potentially for anyone, but not for everyone. So there are some people who don't do well in a group, people who may have social anxiety, people who are having trouble self-identifying their interests and capabilities, people who may not be able to fully participate in completing the exercises and assignments, even with support. So it could be for anyone, but not necessarily for everyone at a given time. So who are good participants for guided group discovery? So people who enjoy that camaraderie, who enjoy working with others. It is very useful for people who have 1 or more barriers to employment, although I have to say we've used it with people with and without disabilities, and it really does open people's eyes to the possibilities that might be available to them. It allows for specific conditions of employment to be identified and addressed. It's particularly good for people who have been unsuccessful with traditional approaches to job development. So I'd like to now turn it over to my colleague, Nancy Boutot, to provide you with specifics about guided group discovery and why you might want to introduce it with the veterans with whom you work. Nancy? You're on mute, I believe.
You're absolutely right. You would think after how many years we would learn this. When I say we, I mean me. Thank you very much, Rebecca. Appreciate that. If you bear with me for 1 second, my screen is not showing up the way I want it to. So I am going to do something that should take no longer than 2 seconds, and hopefully that will get us all back on track. And again, when I say all, I mean we. So Rebecca, do you still see my screen, your screen, the way it should be?
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay. Well, thank you again, everyone. So when we talk about customized employment, it really kind of circumvents that comparative approach that we use in traditional assessments. So what I mean by that is traditional job development strategies utilized our standard vocational evaluations that many of us use and prepare people by getting their resume ready, working on job skills, maybe doing some interview practice. After that, the job seeker and whoever's assisting them identify some available jobs, whether that be through the workforce system, Want Ads, Craigslist, you know, wherever it may be. And then from there, they go on to filling out applications and getting interviews, hopefully. Unfortunately, veterans and individuals that have significant barriers to employment often may not stand out as the most qualified candidate. They may have fewer skills. They may have complexities around employment. And when I say fewer skills, I mean fewer skills than that actual job description is asking for. So in a customized approach, what we do is we leave that comparative process behind and we focus on how a person's skills meet an unidentified or identified need for an employer. So the assumption is that employers are always hiring, which pretty much they are, as long as the potential employee brings value to the business. Employers are always looking for employees. We need to get somebody on mute, thanks. Customized employment uses an assessment process known as discovery, and that's what we're going to be talking about. And what that does is seeks to identify people's interests, strengths, and their ideal conditions for employment. It also relies on the use of informational interviews, which we're going to talk about, to collect information on an employer's needs. So rather than just relying on that job description, to do informational interviews instead. And then once a need is identified that matches a job seeker's interests and their conditions for employment, and there seems to be a good fit, that's when a proposal to the employer can be made. So as you can see, it kind of removes that comparative approach. So we're not comparing one candidate to another, which is what happens in typical ways of trying to find a job. So there are 5 modules in Discovery, and we're going to go through all these. But briefly, the first is an introduction of what guided group discovery is, because it could be very different for some people. And we talk about identifying a person's employment team. Module 2 is interests and contributions. Module 3, conditions, accommodations, and disclosure, a very popular module amongst all the folks that we've worked with. Module 4 is the art and science of networking. And then module 5 is putting it all together and taking action. And what comes out of these modules is what we call a blueprint for employment. So I want to show you that real quick so you have an idea as we go through most of the rest of the presentation, what's coming out of all of the lessons and all of the modules that we're going to be doing. So the first part of the blueprint is identifying the person's team. So who's going to help the veteran through this process? You know, what's the relationship to that person? What's their contact information? Simple enough. The second module is contributions. What do we have to offer? What does the veteran have to offer an employer? And we break that down into different categories, such as interests, tasks, skills, and positive personality traits. I work with a lot of youth, so I have to remember to always say positive personality traits, right? Because sometimes we have youth that just want to talk about all their personality traits, some of which may not be the best thing to talk about when you're seeking employment. Section 3 is vocational themes, and really all of Discovery focuses around vocational themes, and we're going to talk about themes more. But basically, themes are what stands out once we've identified those interests, traits, skills, personality, conditions for employment that we've done in the prior lessons. And then once we identify those themes, we kind of look to the community and where are people working that have these similar kind of themes. So we're not looking out in the community for a job description. We're just keeping kind of an open mind to more to themes, vocational themes for the individual. And then the fourth section is conditions for employment. We all have different conditions that we need in order to be the best at our job. So we talk about that, as well as what accommodations might we need, if we're going to disclose disability, how are we going to do that? How are we going to talk about sensitive information? Because that's not always the easiest thing to do. So there's a module that concentrates on that. And then the last is taking action. So we don't just put all this together and, you know, file it away and say, okay, that was a good 5 weeks, or, you know, however long we spent on it, and, you know, what's next? It's, what are we going to do? What tasks do we need to take action on? Who is going to assist me with that? And when am I going to get that done? So now let's go a little more into some depth of the modules. So as I said before, Module 1 is an introduction to guided group discovery, where it's a chance for the group, right, guided group discovery, to get a chance to know each other in a group environment. These may be military brothers and sisters who know each other, or they may be individuals that don't. And what we talk about are different ways to approach the job search. One of the things we always ask is, oh, you know, does this sound familiar? You know, hey, you know, what kind of job do you want? I'll do anything. I'll do anything. I just need a job. And what we realize is those kind of survivor type jobs, you know, just to get the bills paid are not necessarily the right fit. And what discovery does is takes the time to build on that right fit. So we present the concept of discovery and the blueprint, like I just showed all of you. And we identify the personal employment network, like I had mentioned before. And then there's always an assignment at the end of each of our modules. So in this one, we really want people to, you know, identify the people that you're close with in your network, people that you're comfortable talking about these issues with, so that they can help you along the way in terms of looking towards your future career path. So some examples that we give for building your team of supporters is asking people questions like, what do you most admire about me? What do you think are my best skills? What do you think I have to offer an employer? In what type of environment do you think I would work best? And what do you consider my most positive personality characteristics? So as you can see, these aren't questions that you would find on a vocational assessment or a vocational evaluation. You know, we kind of step outside the box a little when we do discovery. Module 2, we do identifying people's interests. So we get into what activities do you enjoy? What do you do in your free time? What are your hobbies? You know, some things that we can start talking about more. And then what about things that are in your home? You know, what do you keep in your home? What are places that you go to in the evening, on the weekends? All of that builds into the discovery process. And then what we also do is identify skills and tasks. Because some of us think it's different, but it's not. The way I say it is my employer hired me for skills that I have, but they actually pay me for completing tasks, right? So if I come to an employer with those skills, but then I'm not completing tasks, there's not a great match there. So we talk about that. And then we also, when we're thinking about skills and tasks, we ask people, what do you want to do? You know, what is it that you really want to do? Because some of us have spent our careers planning for what our next goal is, what our next work life is. You know, some people say that in retirement, you know, when I'm retired, I'm going to be a yoga instructor because that's what I've always wanted to do. So we look at those types of things as well, because maybe those things will come a little bit sooner than later in our careers. All right, let me move on. So when we talk about vocational themes, it's really important we're not talking about job descriptions. Right? If I were to read my job description, which I have not seen in a long time since I got hired about 5.5 years ago, it might still say some of the things that we used to have on all job descriptions, like, other duties as assigned by your supervisor. Or I remember being in jobs and it would say must be able to lift 20 pounds. And I'm like, but their job does not require me to lift anything. It's just those things that are there for coverage of some reason, but that don't necessarily pertain. So we don't think about job descriptions when we think about discovery. We think about themes. And this way we're not limited as much. And I think you'll see that as we go on. So just quickly, an example, construction is a big theme, right? There's a lot of jobs that can fall under construction rather than just saying I'm looking for a roofing job, okay? Because that's real specific, where construction really opens it up a lot more. So hopefully that puts it kind of into context. So, themes are big. They hold many jobs and they open up a lot of different possibilities, even in small communities. One of the things that we talk about in discovery is kind of getting away from the big box employment chains and looking more to smaller employers at times. And then we identify 3 vocational themes. We like 3, it's a good number. It happens to be my favorite number. That's not why it's here. But in all honesty, 1's not enough, right? Because if we choose a theme and we start going down that path, and then we realize that theme isn't going to work, then we're back to square one. So we look at like 3 different themes to start out with, and then we work from there. And then module 3, as I mentioned before, we talk about conditions of employment, and we also talk about accommodations, and we talk about disclosure. So conditions of employment are those things that people need to have in place in order to be successful. As I mentioned before, we all have conditions. I work from home. Many of us are working from home now, but I do that on a daily basis anyway. And one of my conditions is that my home has to be quiet. I can't have distractions around me. So if my husband takes a day off, I say, okay, what are you going to do? Because you really can't be in the house because I need to concentrate. You can't have the TV on, things like that. It's, this is my place of employment. And there's also a difference between conditions and preferences. So the goal is to look at things that are critical to a person's success. So something like I can't work around chemicals due to sensitivities, or fluorescent lights trigger my seizures, or I need to pick up my child from school at 3 o'clock. That's pretty much a condition. Like that needs to be met. It's not just a preference. Where maybe a preference is, I want a corner office with a view. Well, wouldn't we all? So we need to think about those things when we're talking about our preferences. And then the other thing that we talk about in Module 3 is disclosing personal information, which, is not an easy thing to do. A person may or may not need a job accommodation. They may or may not want to disclose their disability. And what we try to remind people is that job accommodations are not disability specific. It's more person and job specific. So I think that takes a little bit of the pressure off. So an example could be of an accommodation could be that maybe somebody can't have their back facing, an open window or an open area. They would prefer having their back, towards a wall. So a simple accommodation could be that that company could reposition the person's desk. So that they're in that comfort zone that they need in order to be productive and meet their whatever they need to do. So a lot of accommodations are simple and easy, but it comes about through disclosing that personal information. And like I said, it's not always easy. It's a personal decision. It deserves a lot of thought and reflection. I am a person with a disability, and I revealed to my employer, I'm 53, I revealed to my employer at age 50 that I have a disability. I was diagnosed at 26. So it's not easy, you know, I'll be the first person to tell you. So we kind of talk about when to disclose, not that I did it the right way, but we just talk about when to disclose and how to disclose. So it's more comfortable for a job seeker to be able to talk about any accommodations they may need. And then we look at conditions for employment and the culture as well. So we look at what is going to be a good fit for a person. And then we look at cultural considerations. So that doesn't necessarily change the theme, right? It just helps us to better define where we're going to look when we start looking in the community for where those themes are going to fit in. So some themes and conditions can be, you know, work hours. It could be the use of particular skills or performance or specific tasks. It could be pay, could be intensity of supervision. And then work culture can be things such as attire, could be humor, right? If you work around me, you typically, you know, I use a lot of humor, and when people smile, that makes me happy. So I hope that people are getting my jokes. It could be indoors or outdoors. It could be sedentary, or somebody might need to be more active, working with others, working alone, you know, whatever it may be. But all those things need to be looked at so that we hopefully get that right fit from the beginning, instead of that survival job that, you know, lasts a couple of 3 months and then we're on to looking for another job. So one of the things that we do once we've looked at our conditions, our preferences, our skills, interests, abilities, is part of discovery is informational interviews. That can really happen anytime throughout the process, but usually they happen kind of around Module 3, around Module 4, as the person has started to be more aware of things that they're interested in. And what informational interviews are is kind of an alternative approach to engaging employers. So rather than waiting for an employer to come to you, you go to the employer and say, hey, I, you know, would just like to talk to you about, you know, some of the skills and tasks that are performed in your workplace. You know, what are some of the conditions for employment here? As you're asking these questions, you're relating it back to the veteran, to that person who's looking for work. So it helps us to avoid thinking about job descriptions. It also helps us to discover new kinds of jobs that we maybe haven't thought about before. And it's a great casual way to develop professional relationships, okay? You're not at a chamber meeting handing somebody a card saying, give me a call, I got the perfect person for you. You know, kind of those high pressure, in my opinion, you know, types of conversations. This is more just a chance for the employer to talk more about their business and how their business operates. And then before I move on, I just want to say, you know, following informational interviews, it's really good to do a critical review with the veteran to see how they can hone their skills for the next interview. You know, how did it go? What made sense? What didn't? And then Module 4, the art and science of networking, Rebecca said it before, somewhere between 70 and 80% of jobs are not advertised. So when we think of it that way, we've really, you know, on top of some challenges that folks may have, and then looking at that statistic, we're really narrowing the field too much sometimes to try to be successful. And employers are really more willing to hire someone that's recommended to them by a colleague or friend. That's actually a lot of the way we do our hiring at NDI. It's through management asking staff, you know, saying these are the needs that we need to have filled, Do you know anybody in your professional world that can do that? So part of networking is the importance of personal contacts, which, if you remember, that's the first thing we did in Module 1, or one of the first things we did, is who are our personal contacts. So you know, this all kind of rounds, you know, works well with one another. And I have to say, you could actually start on Module 5, then do Module 3, then do Module 1. You really don't have to follow the order. I personally think it works better, but you don't necessarily have to. And then you map out your network, you know, who are your friends, family, you know, other veterans, you know, people who may be able to assist you. So, you know, let's say that Rose likes outside work. Let's say she likes to do yard work and house painting and things like that. And she's smiling, so I don't know if that's a yes smile or a no smile. But what if you have a cousin or a somebody who works at a property management company? You know, even if they don't have a job opening, can you do an informational interview, right? So you've got your foot in the door with that employer. That employer may know of another property management company, or 2 weeks down the road when somebody quits, you might be the first on the list for them to call. And then the next thing that we do in Module 4, really the last thing we do, is something called a networking pitch. And that's where people get comfortable talking about oneself. You know, some people call it the elevator pitch. I hear people say, oh, people love to talk about themselves. And I always say, not when they're under pressure. You know, some people do like to talk about themselves. When they're under pressure, it's a totally different ballgame. So people really need to practice introducing themselves, maybe doing a little name dropping. Hey, so-and-so sent me here. Stating the type of work that you're interested in. And then describing your abilities, your positive personality traits, you know, all those things that you've been working on in the prior weeks. And then also give examples of tasks that you can offer the company, things that you've done that you know now through informational interviews and other ways that that company could be interested in. Highlight at least one success, if not more. And then make a specific request for an informational interview, for a referral, for advice. Hey, am I doing the right thing? You know, you're a professional here. Can you give me any advice? You know, if I give you my resume, can you take a quick peek at it? You know, whatever you're comfortable with. Could you show me a tour of your facility so I can get to know more what it's like? And then, of course, thank the person. But here's a networking pitch that I want to roll by you. Roll, as in like Doe. Hi, my name is John Doe, and I'm interested in a career in baking. Chandra Hill at the Career Center recommended that I talk to you. I have experience as a baker in the Marines, and I hope to go to culinary school at some point. I'm good at working with dough, making pastries, decorations. Everyone I know always asks me to make desserts for holidays, birthdays. Would you or someone you know be interested or could use someone like me? Right, so very low pressure. It doesn't put the business back up because you're really not, you know, asking for a hard ask. You're going to stick out in that person's mind. That person, you know, restaurateur, you know, may know of another place that is hiring. So there's just, you know, lots of good things that can come from an informational interview. And then we go on to Module 5, our last module, which is taking action. So practicing the networking pitch, right? Doing it once, you know, doesn't do it. If I had only practiced once to do this presentation, I'd probably still be on like slide 22. So practice hopefully, you know, helps. The blueprint that I showed earlier on in the presentation, that's fluid. That can be changed at any given time. And towards the end, we're going to show you some resources where you could have a paper blueprint. You can do it online. It can be changed at any time. As I mentioned, the end of the blueprint has action steps. And then you want to look at any supplemental contacts that you may want to identify, like are there specific employer contacts at the end of the group that you want to link people to? Are there community resources? has the group identified other things or people from the community they want to bring in to talk to the group? So the group doesn't have to stop, right? As Rebecca said, if this is a part of a job club, maybe it continues on and people keep reporting back on how their job search is going. So all of what I've just said, I can basically sum up in 2 slides, which I'll do now. So as we see here, the slide is that traditional assessment, right? We take that standardized information, you know, that typical assessments and vocational evaluations gather. You know, we put all those bits in at the top of the funnel, and then what comes out is, if we're lucky, 3 vocational goals. For others, it may be less. You know, if you look at the Dictionary of Occupational Titles, it could be a few more, but they're pretty narrow. Where if we look at discovery, we flip that. It flips that funnel. So it starts with the basic question of, who are you? You know, who is Nancy? And then the objective is to learn as much as possible about that job seeker, and then take that information to uncover really limitless possibilities. So really it goes from where conventional methods narrow the focus, discovery really approaches, opens up the approach that can lead to a lot of different possibilities. So thank you very much for your time. With that, I am going to turn it back over to Rebecca, and thank you.
I have to remember to unmute myself. Thank you, Nancy. That was great. So we want to make sure that we leave you with a few more nuggets of information and then some resources. But I want to ask you, you know, Nancy's presentation made me think for a minute about jobs in the military that might require these skills: problem solving, spatial and hand-eye coordination, quick reflexes, creativity, organizational skills, resource management, multitasking, critical thinking. Now, if we had more time, we'd ask you to type in some of the jobs in the chat box that in the military that might require that skill set, because it probably applies to many, if not most jobs. And that learning through discovery about skills like these and ones that someone especially liked or excelled at can really open a vista to a wide variety of vocational themes. I really love the funnel example that Nancy used, because it really does open things up. But those aren't necessarily things that people think about when they're approaching an employer, that they've excelled at resource management, critical thinking, multitasking, you know, so it really does get you to capture some other things. But coincidentally, I got that list as what's required to be good at video gaming. So unrelated to the military, but you know, again, it opens up other jobs and other possibilities. We want to tell you about another resource that Lead Center developed called self-guided discovery. So we talked about people who may not do as well in a group situation, who want to be more independent, want to do it more themselves. So individual discovery, this individual self-guided discovery is a process that can be done with as much or as little support from a facilitator as someone might want. It assists people in thinking about the places where they are most at ease. They also will think about the people in their lives, how much they need to earn, how it might impact their benefits, and really looks at many of the same things that guided group discovery looks at, but in a much more independent way, where you don't have to be part of the group. And it focuses on their exploitable skills, in quotes, you know, what they know how to do, what tools, equipment, machinery they use, which were their most favorite and least favorite, what they learned and performed in the military, what they liked and didn't like in previous jobs. So again, it's another process that requires reflection and you know, really putting things together until you get to a vocational theme. It also looks at conditions of employment that someone may need to be successful, but also gets people to think about places that they go in the community, what are the businesses that they frequent and who they know, who are their neighbors, what do they do for a living, how you usually interact with them. So again, they become a group of people who could become part of your network, who you could do informational interviews with. So it's a similar process, but something that a facilitator can be available for, but would have a much more hands-off approach and would be available more as a resource. It still enables the veteran to have control of their process and to be the final decision maker. So we wanted to let you know that these resources, so on the Lead Center website, at the link, and these slides will be posted on the NASWA Veterans Conference site, so you'll be able to just click on these links. If you clicked on that link, you would find these documents. So there's a facilitator's guide to get someone started on the road to self-guided discovery, helping people to discover their own path to employment. And then there are 3 appendices. One that's a customized employment planning tool that people can use, all very user-friendly, all accessible. There's a workbook on developing vocational themes, which we've talked about on and off. And there's an employment toolbox with other things to help people identify what's going to be a good match. Also, the guided group discovery process that we talked about is available for free download on the Lead Center website. So there's a guided group discovery veterans manual that was developed specifically for veterans and with consultation with veterans and people who run programs that will walk you through the process of being a facilitator, of introducing all of the pieces that Nancy talked about. There's a PowerPoint, if that's your preferred way of interacting with people. There's a PowerPoint that walks you through everything that's in the Guided Group Discovery Manual. There's a print version of a participant workbook that leads up to the full blueprint for employment. And we created an online version of the participant workbook, so you could do it online, and that allows you to keep logging back in and updating information as you learn more about yourself or identify additional employers or build your network. So those are all available. There's no charge for any of it. There are also archived webinars about this. So those are resources, and we wanted to just spend a minute. Do we have a minute? We have a minute on the role of facilitators. So in both the Guided Group Discovery Manual and the Self-Guided Discovery Manual, it talks about the role that facilitators can play. So there are decision points about who you might want to partner with. It's often beneficial to co-facilitate or have someone else involved in the facilitation of guided group discovery sessions. It's an opportunity to bring in partners. So if you're working across programs or across systems, if you're partnering with your American Job Center or vocational rehabilitation or VRE or whomever, it's a way to do that. And the manuals will tell you how to do that, all the things that a facilitator might need to do, how to set up sessions. It gives you suggestions for recruiting participants. There are templates of things that you can use, and information on different ways that you can present the materials that are available. The other thing that facilitators do is to help participants translate their information into employment possibilities. So taking what they're learning about themselves and what they're capturing and turning that into vocational themes, employment possibilities, potential employers to be contacting. Facilitators provide support and assistance with assignments, make sure that blueprints or employment plans are completed. I mentioned before that there's an online version of the participant manual. It allows you to download the blueprint so you can save it or email it to your vocational counselor or someone else that may be assisting you. So it allows you to share it with people who might be supporting you. And facilitators also provide or connect people with folks who can support them after guided group discovery, if they're going to need retention support or support in acclimating to a new job. And as Rose mentioned in the beginning, there's an exciting new resource that is posted at this link on the DRIVE website. There's a drivedisabilityemployment.org, a brief that tells the stories of 5 wounded warriors who obtained employment by using discovery and customized employment. So it's very uplifting stories and gives you a better sense of how this works on the ground. So we wanted to leave a few minutes for questions. I've responded to a few as we've gone through, but I think one of our facilitators, maybe Liam, can highlight if there are any questions that people have asked.
Yeah, thanks, Rebecca. We have a recent question. Let's see. Big supporter of the informational interviews. Do the service members like that less formal approach? Can you talk a little bit more about this, perhaps give an example?
Hey, Liam, thanks. Can you just, oh, I didn't hear the first part of the question, but if you did, Rebecca, go for it.
No, go ahead. It was just somebody said that they're a big supporter of informational interviews and wanted to know if service members like that less formal approach.
Yeah, and examples, did the person say?
Can you talk a little more about this or perhaps give an example?
So there can be lots of other ways that somebody can use informational interviews. So, you know, as I mentioned, it can be used for kind of getting your feet wet, you know, getting a little more comfortable. It can be used for doing some networking. So even if that informational interview with that person that you're interviewing doesn't have any job openings, they may know of other people that do. And really, it can happen in any area of employment. So, you know, it's not for a specific field. It could be used anywhere at any time.
Yeah,
Hope that helped.
One of the things that I really like about it is that, you know, you really can ask someone for 15 minutes of their time, you know, to just say, you know, I'm working with people who have an interest in your industry, or I have an interest in your industry. You know, could I get 15 minutes of your time to you know, just learn more about it? And people usually give you an hour and give you a tour as part of the process. But one of the other things that I really like about it is that it turns everyone into a job developer. You all of a sudden see the whole world through the eyes of identifying unmet needs in businesses. You know, and there are so many stories of people, you know, just walking into some place and saying, wow, look at all those file boxes. You know, who organizes all your information? And you know, they'll say, well, no one, you know, and they may know someone who has great organizational skills and who really can digitize everything that they've been piling up in boxes, and it turns into a job. So you really do, you start noticing unmet employer needs. You know, you're at a dinner party and somebody talks about something, and you all of a sudden remember that there are people who would just be a wonderful fit for that. So it really does open the door for both pumping people for information through these informational interviews, but also, you know, envisioning what the possibilities might be.
I think we have time for one more question, and it kind of gets at what a few people are talking about in the chat, and that's how do you, what strategies do you recommend for individuals who may lack confidence, or especially veterans who may lack confidence for any number of reasons?
Nancy, did you want to start?
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think the networking pitch and practicing. You know, somebody's got to be comfortable. The last 2 jobs that I interviewed for, they came to me, right? I was very lucky that the 2 organizations came to me, but I still had to interview. they were a couple of the most hardest interviews that I've ever had. And they came to me, and it's because it's, you know, a lot of people don't like talking about themselves. A lot of people are uncomfortable, you know, just coming out and, you know, opening up to conversation. So I really think practicing makes a world of difference. And that can be to anybody, right? I mean, friends at church, you can say, hey, you know, I'm trying this out. You know, I really need to find a job, but I've got to get better at this introduction speech. You know, can I run it by you, and just practice as much as you possibly can.
Yeah, I also think that the process, the information that gets captured in the blueprint is a great confidence builder. You know, it highlights positive personality traits that you may not have noticed in yourself. I mean, as you interview other people in your network about what you admire about me and what you think I have to offer employers. And, you know, as you start, especially if you're interviewing other people that you served with in the military, and people may highlight some things that you did and you accomplished, or, you know, that list that I read off before of problem solving skills and creativity and multitasking and quick responses, all of those things, you know, when you start to say, wait, I have all those skills and abilities and I have that to offer, you know, rather than looking at a job description and saying, oh, I can only do 3 of these 7 things. You know, it's a very different way of approaching how you may think of yourself and how you may be able to market yourself. So I think that the process itself is very uplifting and confidence building for people.
Well, I think that brings us to our time, but thank you so much, Nancy, Rebecca, and Rose. This was really informative. And as I mentioned, this presentation, as well as the slides and a recording, will be available on NASWA's website. So before we close, I'm just going to post here in the chat a link to the plenary session, which begins at 3:20. And we're going to bring up a quick poll for our participants today. So thank you again. And with that, the poll the link is in the chat.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.